form of propaganda, as if the government knows something that we don't know. I mean, if I said, I know somebody that knows somebody else who says there's a crashed UFO that's being stored under a Welsh mountain, because I know something that nobody else, or very few people know, that makes me look important. Now, I made that up. I don't know whether there's a UFO under a Welsh mountain, but I just made that up. But do you see what I'm getting at? Because the government's run by psychopaths, and the psychopath mindset is they're really illusionists. They're putting something over to you that's not quite true. But again, that's another story. I've had quite a lot of experience with psychopaths, and I'm currently writing a book about it. But again, I don't wish to, shall we say, go away from what I'm talking about at the moment. Now, when you look at a gun, what we're really looking at is a tube that sends a lump of lead out of it due to an explosion, and it comes out at a very high speed. Now, it was the same in World Wars I and II, and the same principle today. And the only advancement in guns was happened in the middle of the 19th century when they invented rifling. But really, all it is a lump of metal that's sent on its way, a projectile, up this tube due to an explosion or controlled explosion that goes along at a very high speed and kills people. And really, apart from that, they've got more efficient at it, but nothing much has really changed, has it? Now, I remember when the Falklands War started, I brought home a paper that showed how high-tech the modern British Army is. The centre spread gave the reader the impression that high-tech weaponry was so advanced and so superior, the Falklands War would be a walkover. I remember my dad looking at the article and saying to my mum, "This brings back memories of before the war." They said the same then. Dad then laughed his head off and said to me, "That article is a load of old rubbish." In fact, he said it's like sewage from China, it's far-fetched. He said, when the war gets started, it'll be as basic as all other wars. Dad was totally correct. Several weeks later on the BBC Propaganda News, they showed a serviceman with a Second World War vintage machine gun that was tied to a ship's balustrade with a lump of old rope. He was firing at Argentinian jets as they streaked across the bay. With a grin, my dad said, "High-tech, eh? We've heard it all before." I believe the connection between pre-war bluff and the current UFO cover-up is identical. I think governments are as much in the dark regarding ET as we are. In fact, ufologists probably know more about ET than governments. I do believe, though, that governments are using the mystery of UFOs to their best advantage. Our view of extraterrestrials, sorry I got wrong teeth, is mainly from Hollywood, the fiction factory. That in itself raises many questions. I believe the military-industrial complex, NASA and the government are all part of the Hollywood fiction factory that tells us what they want, tells us what they want you to believe. Now let's join the dots. Can you see the similarities with today, especially with UFOs? It's in the authorities' best interests to get us to believe the military is in contact with advanced aliens and are in possession of advanced weaponry. To me, it's a military bluff, hence the reason I don't believe a word of it. Again, further proof is Hollywood. There's no end of films showing us secret military areas where they're working on crashed, retrieved UFOs. It should be remembered, as said earlier, that Hollywood work hand in glove with the military. Need I say more? It's also a good money spinner. Now, I can hear experienced ufologists say, what about the many whistleblowers that have seen these back-engineered UFOs and have encountered aliens liaising with the military? This is where I believe MK Ultra comes in. MK Ultra was a program of mind-altering experiments. I've seen hypnotist acts whereby people are given an onion and hypnotized to believe the onion is a delicious apple. They chomp into the onion convinced it is an apple, and to tell them it really is, and they really believe it is an apple, because it tastes of an apple. Now, in my view, the authorities hypnotise people to believe they have seen extraterrestrial craft being worked on when they haven't. Therefore, whistleblowers can be very convincing, and to them it's totally true. But the trouble is, give me the positive evidence, of which there's very little. And of course you can get several whistleblowers saying the same thing, because if they've all been hypnotised, they will say the same thing. Now, I believe extraterrestrials, a word which I can't obviously pronounce very well, could be regularly visiting the Earth and possibly abducting animals and people. I don't believe they come here in saucer or cigar-shaped craft that are a few technological steps up from a tin can. I think they are able to get here without such craft. But I don't think governments have a clue what's going on, and are using the UFO phenomena as a form of mind control or religion to control the masses. Now, in the 1970s I worked for a firm of structural engineers. One of the design engineers was in the army in the 1960s. At the time, well, that was at the time rather, of the Warminster Thing. Now, the Warminster Thing, as it was known, was a series of UFO incidents that happened in and around Warminster. It happened at a time when there was a spate of UFO sightings in the West Country that included the police seeing flying crosses in the sky and all manner of strange goings on. I remember it quite clearly, even though I was very young at the time. The engineer I worked with was a very straightforward person, not the type to spin a yarn. At the time, I was fascinated in the unexplained, rather, and still am, and always had my nose in a book about UFOs, etc. Anyway, one lunch hour I got into conversation with the engineer about the book I was reading. I can't remember the title. The engineer then went on to tell me about what happened to him when he was in the army. I'm not sure if he was in the Royal Engineers, although I think he had something to do with making apparatus for use for the army in the field. He told me that young students who had just been recruited by MI5 were sent to Warminster, where he and his unit were given the task of making super powerful remote-controlled model aircraft. I think they bought the model aircraft off the shelf and souped them up. Part of the brief was to increase their remote-controlled range by an incredible distance and make the engines as quiet as possible. When handed over to the Secret Service students, who worked rather in liaison with the army, the students were briefed to paint the wingtips of the model aircraft in a luminous paint. Then apply luminous streamers to the wings. In fact, I may have got that wrong. I think the army unit did that. And they were asked to make streamers as long as possible, all luminous. After a few test flights, always performed on a derelict remote airstrip at night, the students and the engineer teams were sent to a high vantage point just outside the town of Warminster. Their task was to fly the model aircraft low over the town in the early hours of the morning. I remember him saying at 1 AM, and I think it went on from 1 to about 3 AM. Then, in the aftermath, the students' job was to record and monitor the response from the public. The model aeroplane flying didn't happen every night, but on random nights over a period of a few weeks, each time from a different vantage point outside the town. The engineer told me the model aircraft flying happened soon after the Warminster Thing and hit the headlines. Now, could this be an acute case of the government deliberately muddling the facts or endeavouring to show the evidence of a prank in order to shift people's attention away from what was really happening, in which the government, I believed, didn't actually have a clue? I think NASA is also an integral part of the control mechanism. I don't believe any human has ever stepped foot on the moon,